freak. Terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me.
Every punk in this town is scared stiff.
Hey, who is this guy?
What are they seeing up there?
Oh, my God.
Wouldn't hit a guy with glasses on, would you?
I don't know who you think you are.
What are you? I'm Batman.
Can somebody tell me what kind of a world we live in where a man dressed up as a bat gets all of my press?
The making of Batman was a marathon. It was not a sprint. It was a marathon where there were constant speed bumps, and any moment, failure faced you, whether it was developing the script, whether it was finding the filmmaker, whether it was casting the picture, whether it was the budget of the film, whether it was just the anxiety and fear of this unique project that was dark. It haunted the project from the very beginning.
Batman created just a universe that I could really believe in. And I always regretted that as my favorite character in comics, it had not ever quite been portrayed the way I thought that Bob Kane and company really intended it to be. And I really wanted to see that creature of the night emerge and let the world at large see that there is more to Batman than pow, zap, and wham. And for about 20 years, whenever anyone mentioned the word Batman or wrote about it in print, pow, zap, and wham were always attached to the name. I wanted to detach it and get back to the heart of the character.
I think that Batman is a seminal movie of the last quarter century because it broke all the rules. It redefined what a tentpole movie should be. It dealt with the kind of effects and the kind of artistic choices, casting choices that had not been done before, very gutsy. Tim was on the forefront of a generation of new filmmakers and even the way we marketed the movie. All parts of a whole that, are never easy to come to because when it's uncharted waters, it's lonely out there a little bit.
In the early 1970s at Indiana, they had an experimental curriculum department at the College of Arts and Sciences. And the deal was this: if you had a course that was non-traditional that you wanted to teach at the university and could then appear before a panel of deans and professors and convince them that your course was worthy of academic credit, you could wind up teaching a very unique course to college students for credit. This to me was a golden opportunity. I decided I was going to teach the world's first college-accredited course on comic books. The dean, with his eyeglasses sitting right at the end of his nose, looking down at me over them, said, "So you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university? Mr. Uslan, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I used to read comic books all the time. Superman was my favorite when I was a kid. But comic books are cheap entertainment. They're junk. You can't convince me that they're modern-day folklore or contemporary mythology." And I looked at him and I said, "Are you familiar with the story of Moses?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Could you summarize for me the story of Moses?" He then said, "All right, Hebrew couple had a son, firstborn. The firstborn were being killed, so they put their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the River Nile. And he was later discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own. And then he grew up, he became this great hero to his people." I said, "That's great. You said you read Superman comics?" He said, "Yeah, I used to read them all the time." I said, "Do you remember the origin of Superman?" He said, "Sure. Planet Krypton was about to explode. And a scientist and his wife take their infant son and put him in a little rocket ship and send him to the planet Earth, where he's discovered by the Kents, who raise him as their own." And he stopped, and he looked at me, and he said, "Your course is accredited." Well, my life changed rather quickly because one day, shortly thereafter, I get a call, and it's from Stan Lee.
I thought that was so great. At last, somebody was recognizing comics as a valid form of communication and entertainment. There are few colleges now that don't have popular culture courses, and so many of them concentrate a great deal on comic books, movies, television, the usual. But comic books are now lumped in with the others, so I think that's terrific.
I got a call from Saul Harrison, who was the vice president of DC Comics in New York, and he said, everywhere we look, we're reading about your comic book course, and this is a great thing for the whole industry. We would like you to work with us. We'd like to fly you into New York and talk to you about ways we might be able to work together. And that was the moment I said, my next dream in life, I want to produce a definitive, dark, serious version of Batman as a movie, the way Bob Kane and company really originally intended him back in 1939, as a creature of the night, someone who stalks criminals from the shadows. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what I set my sights on right at that moment. As the fates would have it, I wound up getting a job with United Artists in New York City. It was the only studio based in New York City at the time, and I had the great fortune of meeting Ben Melniker.
My son Charles told me that a young lawyer with whom he was working at United Artists said that he would like to talk to me about Batman.
I tried to explain to Ben how I thought Batman could really work as a movie, why it was important to do it dark and seriously, that we could really reinvent the whole genre of what is a comic book movie, what is a comic book superhero.
I did tell him that I thought his ideas were absolutely electrifying. And the next step, of course, was to make the deal with DC Comics. We did make the deal to secure an option on the motion picture rights, including animation, but excluding television, for Batman and all of the characters in the Batman world.
And on October 3rd, 1979, Batfilm Productions, Inc. was formed, the deal was signed, the money was paid, and I thought we were off running to the races. Much to my surprise and chagrin, I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood.
These studio people we approached didn't like the project. And after maybe 5 or 6 or so of rebuffs like that, the thought occurred to me. A person I knew, Peter Guba, and his partner, Neil Bogart, had a company called Casablanca. I put the call in, and I don't think I had more than a 2 to 3 minute conversation with Peter when he said, "Get Michael and come out here right away."
I think it was about 3 days later, we were in Los Angeles, pitched the whole thing in person to Peter, and he said, I get it, serious, dark, this is what we're gonna do. Go into our business affairs guy and don't leave here until we have a deal. And about 3 days later, we had our deal, and thus began what would turn out to be a 10-year odyssey to bring Batman to the silver screen.
At that time, we were associated with Universal. The property itself was a DC comic, and DC was part of Warner Brothers at that time. And we looked at the project, presented it to Universal as a project to develop, and they passed on it. At that time, Frank Wells was the top mojo at Warner Brothers, and he was eager to get the property back under their wings because he looked at it as an asset that shouldn't be developed or exploited away from the Warner's family, since they owned the legacy of Batman, and it was a cornerstone of the DC comic company. And I remember that his eagerness led us to a deal with Warner Brothers, and I think that was really what started the whole process going.
When I came to Warner Brothers in 1980 and Bob Daly came a few months thereafter, they had, of course, at Warner's made Superman. Batman was the next DC hero who everyone felt this is the way to go. I asked to be involved in the development process, and the process, became legend.
There's making the movie and getting the movie made. They're two different things. It sounds like, how can that possibly be? Well, it is. They're just completely different, and they actually take different skills. In getting the movie made, Superman played an enormous role, and Dick Donner did a brilliant job with Superman, and it was an enormous success. It was a different kind of picture, and so it provided the momentum and the celebrity and the attention of Warner Brothers and the recognition that they shouldn't let these assets out of their keep.
Superman was a kind of a trailblazing movie in the sense it was the first big-budget comic strip that ever made money. Conventional wisdom said that comic strip movies were not going to make money.
That first Superman movie was superb, and it brought families in, not just little children. It made people realize, hey, these are more than just little comic strip characters. These are fascinating characters, and they're incredibly imaginative, and they're visually exciting.
The biggest obstacle was trying to find a tone and direction, and for us all at the studio to agree on that. We went from various extremes. You know, Joe Dante, who went on to direct many movies, including Gremlins at the studio, and Ivan Reitman, who did Ghostbusters. Many people wanted to be involved with the creation of Batman and writing and directing.
They naturally wanted to follow up Superman with Batman, and I was sort of a logical choice. But it pretty quickly became obvious to me that you couldn't write Batman and Superman the same way. They're totally different characters.
When I created the Batman in 1939, he was a dark-brooding vigilante, and his general genre changed in the mid-'60s with the advent of the television show in 1966, where it became campy and comedic. And I prefer, if I had my druthers, I'd rather have the dark, profound, mysterioso Batman rather than the comedic one.
I think Batman had been haunted by the 60s show for years after that show had ended, and I don't think there was any way to shake that in the public's mind until some of the better-known comic book works of the mid to late 80s came out. Around the time that Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns came out in '86, that really charged up Batman's look, and it really redefined the character as a dark, grim, and gritty character. Once movie producers saw that, they said, yes, that's the Batman we want to do. We want to return to the very early, stylish, artistic roots of the character, and that's something that the audience hasn't seen, and it looks nothing like the old mid-'60s serial.
By and large, the translation from the comic book to film or to television has suffered the more it's gone away from its source material. That is, the campy old TV show of Batman was essentially mocking the source material, but it was much campier than the comic book had ever been. If you look at the most successful superhero movies of recent years, they've been the ones that are truest to the old comic books.
It went through so many iterations of screenplays that at some point, the screenplay, and I don't remember whether it was the first year, the third year, it was definitely more like the fifth or sixth year. It was a time when we stopped giving out the comic books, and we stopped really, dealing with the toys, and all the rhetoric kind of like flattened out, and somebody was saying, okay, show me the money, meaning show me the screenplay. I want to see the words on the page.
Project had been kicking around for quite a while, and had been at Warner Brothers, and I think they had done a couple of scripts. They had talked about, all kinds of different approaches. They were going to do an Art Deco period Batman. They were going to do a comedy Batman. They were talking at one point, if I'm remembering properly, about Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin.
In The Hollywood Reporter was a story about Batman may not be made because the script was just rejected by the studio, and if they don't come up with a better script, then they were going to shelve it. And Bob was devastated by that. He prayed for somebody to come along to get Batman back on its feet, and the someone was Tim Burton.
Well, I'd been working at Disney, did a couple of short films, Vincent and Frankenweenie, and there's just kind of languishing there at Disney with not really much to do, and this person, Bonnie Leaf, worked at Warner Brothers, saw my short films and was very supportive of me, and actually, kind of helped get me my first movie, which was Pee-wee's Big Adventure. She showed short films to Paul Rubens and the producers of that, and so it was great. It was actually one of the simplest, easiest jobs. I actually had more trouble getting a job in a restaurant than I did getting that job, which was I was very grateful for, because that sort of got me started and started at Warner Brothers.
I had wound up having an overall deal, a writing deal, at Warner's, and my mentor there was an executive named Bonnie Lee. And eventually one day, I met Tim in her office. We got along pretty well. And a couple of weeks later, I was talking to Bonnie, and she said, Tim asked if you'd come over to his office. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I went over to Tim's office, and we sat around and shot the shit for a while. And at the end of the meeting, he said, well, would you be interested in taking a look at this Batman thing? And I said, finally, yes. Yes, I would. If you insist, Tim, I would be willing to take a look at this Batman thing, just as a personal favor to you.
I got to working on the script and got to working on the thing with Sam before Beetlejuice was released. I mean, because I actually, didn't quite get the green light until Beetlejuice was released. I think they were sort of waiting to see. I mean, they believed in me, but I think there was that final piece of the puzzle, like, well, did his last movie is it going to make some money, And so once the first weekend, once Beetlejuice opened, it looked like it was going to be a relatively, be okay. That's when we got the green light to do Batman. I mean, I'd been working on it, though, up until that point.
Here came along a fellow in Tim Burton who liked the original material and liked the comic material and had a sensibility, because he was a graphic artist. He came out of that milieu. So he had a sensibility about the material, and yet he'd already made films, and quirky, unique films. There was a danger in that because it didn't look like what everyone thought it was. But the value of that was the imagination and the intuition took everybody to another place. And what he baked into the process was the most important element in a film. He built risk into it. He said, I'm going to take this to another place where there is not a lot of certainty. I'm going to give you variety. And that scares people, scares studios, financiers, and it did all the way up the food chain till the very end. But that was the component that helped, that very risk component helped get it made and helped make it what it is.